Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Tamara Wyzanski, and I'm with Sarepta's Patient Affairs team. We are really pleased to be welcomed by the Coalition to Cure Calpain, welcoming us to present our presentation today, which is a journey update for the 2A R1 Calpainopathy community. I'll first turn it over to Jen to just say a few welcome remarks, and then we'll move to our presentation.
Thanks, Tamara. Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to give everybody another minute or so because we have a lot of people joining today. Great. Well, welcome. I am Jennifer Levy. I'm the Scientific Director at Coalition to Cure Calpain 3. We are a nonprofit focused on driving research towards a cure for limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type 2A or R1. We invited Sarepta to join us today for this webinar. They are going to be discussing drug discovery and the role of natural history in drug discovery. And we're really excited because they're going to share about the Journey study, which now has a 2A cohort. So a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this webinar and it will be posted probably in 1 to 2 weeks on C3's website. And you'll see that there's a Q&A box. So if you have questions during the presentation, please put them in there. And at the end of our webinar, we will answer those questions live. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our attendees from Sarepta, Dr. Amanda Haydett-Phillips and Tamara Wyzanski.
Thank you, Jen. You can move to the next slide. So I just want to first, thank C3 and Jen for the invite to share this update with the community today. I'm one of the global program team leaders at Sarepta Therapeutics, and one of the programs that I lead is our gene therapy program for SRP 9010, which is a gene therapy we have in preclinical development for LGMD2A R1. I joined Sarepta a couple of years ago, but I previously worked for some other companies that are developing gene therapies. And I'm a PhD research scientist by training, but also spent time working at the Muscular Dystrophy Association prior to coming into biotech. And I'll be sharing information with you today about natural history studies. And I'm joined by one of my colleagues, Tamara Wyzanski, in Patient Affairs, who's going to help answer some of the questions in our live Q&A at the end. So we can go to the next slide. So the goal of this webinar really is to provide you with information about a natural history study that's sponsored by Sarepta that you may choose to be involved in. But before we really go into that specifically, I think it's important to, just review what natural history studies are, why we do them, and how they play an important role in the process of drug development. Next slide. So you've probably heard that it takes on average about 10 to 15 years to develop a new drug. And during that time, there's multiple steps, such as early research studies, where you're working to come up with a concept of the drug and show, proof of that concept, often in the laboratory. There's also preclinical studies that are often conducted in animals to test the drug's effect and evaluate the safety of the drug. And in the context of gene therapy, for example, you may need to deliver that gene therapy to a mouse that models the disease that you're interested in, and show that you can, for example, slow the progression of the disease in that mouse. Safety studies are also conducted in animals to try to detect any harmful effects of the drug, prior to testing that drug in people. These preclinical studies are also helpful to identify what's the correct dose of the drug that should be administered in humans based upon the doses that were safe and effective in animal studies. And if all goes well in those preclinical studies and the drug shows promise, it's then moved into clinical development, which also has several phases. Typically, drugs are studied first in small phase 1 or phase 2 clinical trials, where the primary objective is to evaluate the safety and tolerability of the drug in a small number of participants. And these early trials are many times done in healthy volunteers, but gene therapy is different since, once you give the therapy, we can't remove it like you can, when you have a pill that you would stop taking. And so in early trials for gene therapy, these are often conducted in patients to evaluate safety and may sometimes also serve as a way to characterize the effect of the drug, often, through measuring a biomarker, for example. Later stage clinical trials are often called phase 3 or pivotal trials. And the objective of these trials is to characterize the effect of the drug in a larger patient population and generate the necessary evidence to bring the drug to market through regulatory approvals. So, and then even after a drug is on the market and available to people outside of the clinical trials, there's often still post-marketing studies that continue to, for example, monitor the safety of the drug or evaluate the drug's effect in patients outside of the drug label. So I said this process is typically 10 to 15 years long, but gene therapy is an especially complex and new area. And one piece that's not even covered on this slide is the time it takes to develop the process to actually manufacture the drug, which is very complex also with gene therapy. So it's very important to take the time early in development to work out a manufacturing process that's very rigorous and reproducible so that there's minimal changes you really have to make in that process down the road. And we try to avoid the need to have to repeat studies each time the manufacturing process is changed. Another challenge that can extend the timeline for drug development is if you're developing a drug for a rare disease. So studies have shown that it takes longer to develop drugs for rare and ultra rare diseases. And this is, really because not as much information may exist about the disease and how to design a clinical trial. It also may take a long time to recruit enough people living with the disease for that clinical trial. And at Sarepta, we're trying to accelerate drug development for the LGMDs. And that's why we're hoping to address some of these challenges through natural history studies. So you can go to the next slide, please. So what is a natural history study? These are essentially observational studies, and they're conducted like a clinical trial, but there's no drug that's given. The point of the study is really to follow people that are currently living with the disease to learn how the disease progresses without treatment. And, this seems like a simple concept, but it's actually incredibly important for drug development, especially for rare diseases where there's less knowledge that's been, published and known about a disease. So, for example, if you're running a clinical trial and you want to know if your drug is working to help slow the disease, how do you know if it's having an effect if you don't first know how the disease would have progressed without the drug? Can go to the next slide. And so here I'll review in more detail some of the ways that natural history studies play an essential role in drug development. First, if you're a company designing a clinical trial, you have to consider what you would measure in that trial. So, what do you think the drug could improve, for example, and how would you measure that improvement? Some examples, could be tests to evaluate physical function or chemical or biological markers in the blood or muscle, for example. These measures are called endpoints, and natural history studies can inform which endpoints are measured in a clinical trial. So you want to choose an endpoint for a clinical trial that you can measure, objectively, reproducibly, and a natural history study is where you can test this. So a company may want to select an endpoint that they believe may show change over time. For example, you may expect a person to decline, for example, 3 points in a certain test over a year. And then perhaps after you administer a drug, you might expect to only see like a 1 point decline. but you wouldn't know that information about the natural course of the disease if you didn't first run the natural history study. Second, the data that's collected in a natural history study can sometimes be used as a lead-in or an observational period for a clinical trial where a treatment is being tested. This can be a way to monitor that participant over time and get a sense for how they're progressing in their own individual disease course prior to treatment, and can be a powerful way to then show a change in that course after treatment. Third, natural history studies can also sometimes serve as non-treated comparator groups in clinical trials. So, for example, if a company has run a natural history study using very rigorous methods, matching essentially what they would do in a clinical trial, and has generated strong representative data for how the people living with a particular disease progress, the sponsor may be able to use that natural history study in place of having to do a placebo arm in their clinical trial. Or it may be a way to at least reduce perhaps the number of participants that would have to be given a placebo instead of the treatment. So overall, the goal for natural history studies is to speed the pace of drug development by allowing us to understand at an early time in the process of drug development how that disease progresses. It can speed development by allowing sponsors to make better, more informed decisions when they design studies to try to increase the chance of success and avoid having to repeat those studies in the future. Next slide. So you may have also heard about patient registries. And so I'll discuss some of the differences and similarities between natural history studies and registries. Both natural history studies and registries track and follow people living with a particular disease over time. They're both great ways to stay connected to ongoing research in the disease community, and they both collect information that's extremely helpful in the process of drug development. Natural history studies often require participants to travel to a clinical site for in-person testing, for example, physical function tests or blood tests or imaging tests. On the other hand, registries often collect and store information digitally. So you may enter information about yourself and your disease online, and you may even need to upload information like your genetic testing results, for example, but you typically don't have to go visit a site in person. Both registries and natural history studies are extremely valuable, and there's really no one-size-fits-all approach. So even in rare diseases, there's often different registries and natural history studies, and studies have different but related goals that are reflected in the design of the studies. So on this slide are some of the different natural history studies and registries that exist in the LGMD2A field. Journey is the Sarepta-sponsored global natural history study that I'll share more information about in just a minute. And GRASP is an academic-led consortium run at multiple academic centers in the US and a couple of sites in Europe, doing complementary work, and has really collected an impressive amount of natural history data and other LGMD subtypes. The C3 registry is a platform that's designed to bring the Calpainopathy community together to collect patient data and to advance treatments for the disease. The registry collects data through a series of surveys that are accessed online. And the registry is also a very good way to stay informed on upcoming research studies or in clinical trials. You can go to the next slide, please. So, in thinking about where natural history studies fit into this drug development pathway, it's important to know that they're ongoing and they're important through all these stages of development. One of the common frustrations we've heard is, why do we need another natural history study? Why can't we move straight to clinical trials? And I think it's important to understand that natural history studies aren't typically the gating factor in moving to clinical trials. So there's typically ongoing research, preclinical studies, drug manufacturing work that all has to be completed before a clinical trial starts. Natural history studies are a great way to collect information about a disease during that same time that all that preclinical and manufacturing work is ongoing. And that way, the sponsor is really set up for their best chance at success even before initiating a clinical trial. I also want to recognize that participating in a natural history study is a huge commitment, and some of you may already be participating in these type of studies, and thank you so much for all of your time and effort to move the field forward. And go to the next slide. So at Sarepta, we have gene therapies that are in development for multiple subtypes of LGMD. These are all AAV gene therapies, and many of the programs leverage the same type of technology that's used for Elevidys, which is the gene therapy recently FDA approved for the treatment of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. All of these programs that you see are at different stages and are moving forward. Our most progressed program is for LGMD2E R4, and we've launched recently a phase 3 trial this year to test SRP 9003 in people living with LGMD2E. Our gene therapy for LGMD2D R3 is also progressing well, and we plan to initiate a clinical study this year testing SRP 9004 in people living with LGMD2D. Our gene therapy for LGMD2B R2 is also currently in an early stage clinical trial. And probably of most interest to you today is SRP 9010, which is our gene therapy that's in preclinical development for people living with LGMD2A R1. So just a little bit of background on this program. This gene therapy program was in-licensed from Nationwide Children's Hospital, where promising early research studies had been performed in the laboratory of Dr. Zarif Sahank. So at Sarepta now, we're building upon this early work by Dr. Sahank through our own internal research studies in animals and also manufacturing development work. And we'll keep the community updated as we get closer to testing this gene therapy in clinical trials. At the bottom, you see Journey, which is Sarepta's natural history study that spans across the sarcoglycanopathies, and now Calpainopathy, which is what we'll discuss next. And, although we're focused today on LGMD2A R1, I did want to share this slide about our pipeline because I think it's important to know that the work on each of these programs, does not occur within a vacuum. And it's often the same and connected teams working on these programs at Sarepta. And so we take all of the learnings from all of these programs, that are farther along to help inform the programs that are at an early stage, with the goal to really advance the early stage programs rapidly. Go to the next slide, please. So we're really excited to share that we're now enrolling people living with LGMD2A R1 into Journey, and I'll speak next about some of the details. Go to the next slide. So earlier I spoke in general about the value of natural history studies and the drug development process. And Journey is a way for us to learn more about the LGMDs and how they specifically progress over time. Journey is a 3-year natural history study with sites located globally and includes these 4 specific LGMD subtypes that are shown on this slide. Journey doesn't involve a treatment, but rather studies the natural progression of the LGMDs and how the disease affects the muscles, lungs, and heart of affected individuals. We know, that there are currently no treatments available for the LGMDs, but as treatments or clinical trials become available for these subtypes, participants are able to leave the Journey study and join a clinical trial if they're eligible. One note is that Journey is now completely enrolled for the sarcoglycanopathies, so we're only actively enrolling patients with calpainopathy. Go to the next slide, please. So we recognize that participation in Journey is not a small commitment, and we really encourage you to speak with your doctor, more to understand and learn all the details. We're enrolling people living with LGMD2A R1 who are ages 4 and older with a confirmed clinical and genetic diagnosis of LGMD2A R1. We're also recruiting participants who are ambulatory and those that are non-ambulatory. Journey is a long-term commitment, so for those who do choose to enroll, you would participate for 3 years with in-person visits every 6 months, and then remote telephone visits in between. Some of the study assessments would include tests to measure your physical function and assess your quality of life. There's also other laboratory tests, including blood draws and tests to measure the function of your heart and lungs. Lastly, there's an option to also undergo a single muscle biopsy, and I'll review more why we're asking participants to consider donating a muscle biopsy. I'll share, the links with more information at the end of this presentation, and we also encourage you to speak with the study coordinator at the site to review all of the testing and commitments of the study if you're interested in enrolling. Next slide. So here's the key inclusion and exclusion criteria for Journey. The inclusion criteria means that these are the criteria you must meet in order to enroll, mainly that you or your child are ages 4 and older, and have a confirmed clinical and genetic diagnosis of LGMD2A R1. We're unfortunately unable to enroll participants who have a cognitive delay or impairment that could confound some of the measurements that are done in the study. And your doctor would really be the best one to assess you and ensure that you don't have any other medical condition or circumstance that would compromise your participation in the study. I also just want to reiterate that if you choose to participate in Journey, this would not prevent you from participating in any future clinical trials with Sarepta or other sponsors. In fact, participation in natural history studies in general can be a great way to learn and to stay up to date about new clinical trials that are launching, and in some scenarios may support enrollment into a clinical trial. So, for example, we don't currently have any clinical trials at Sarepta enrolling for people living with 2A, but for trials for LGMD2E, we're recruiting from Journey and also from the GRASP natural history study. Although, again, participation in a natural history study is not a requirement to enroll in a clinical trial. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, an optional part of the Journey study is donation of a muscle biopsy. Although muscle biopsies, are commonly ordered by physicians, we understand that this is a lot we're asking of participants. So I want to take the opportunity to explain to you why we're asking so that you can really make an informed decision. So as shown here on the slide, muscle is the key tissue that's affected in the LGMDs, and it's also the target for our gene therapy. In a disease, like the LGMDs, where what the gene is that's mutated, there's the opportunity to use AAV gene therapy to deliver a functional copy of that gene directly back to the muscle. So in the case of a clinical trial, you could imagine that you'd want to check in participants that receive the gene therapy if you can detect the functional gene in the muscle and prove that it's working properly to produce the missing or dysfunctional protein. And we often use biomarkers to do this. So biomarkers are a very important way to show in a short period of time that a gene therapy is working as intended. And with a rare disease that's, we know is variable from person to person, it can often take many years to show that that therapy improves physical function or allows a person to retain key functions like walking, compared to those who did not receive the therapy. Biomarkers may allow us to get at that answer sooner, and we want to speed up drug development so we can reach more people quicker with therapies. But we cannot develop muscle biomarkers without having access to, muscle tissue from the people that are affected with the disease. So we really need this tissue to better understand the disease and develop these biomarkers from the beginning. That's why it's so important to consider this optional part of the study. We have heard, from many of you that you've had bad experiences with muscle biopsies in the past. And, I would encourage, before you make a decision on this part of the study, to talk with your doctor to really understand, how the procedure has evolved and what it entails so that you can make an informed decision for yourself. But again, this part of the study is completely optional. Can go to the next slide, please. So we do recognize that participation in Journey is a burden on the participant and their family, and we really want to reduce that burden wherever possible. So that's why we're reimbursing participants for meals and travel costs that are related to the study visits. We use a vendor who can help you in making these travel arrangements. And in addition, participants may be eligible to receive a financial stipend to support study participation. However, we unfortunately are unable to support relocation services or applications for visas. If you have concerns about travel, we recommend that you speak to the study coordinator to really discuss what's most feasible for you or your child or your family to potentially participate. And, again, we recognize that this is a huge commitment and time away from school, from work, from your family and other obligations. And so we really thank you for considering to enroll in Journey. Can go to the next slide, please. So on this slide are the links and QR codes for places that you can go to find out more information about the clinical sites that are participating in Journey or get other information about Journey. So the Genesis website on the top here is the Sarepta site that has information on Journey. So you can get the QR code, and then if you click on Find a Study, you'll see Journey listed and the details on Journey. The QR code on the bottom will take you to the listing for Journey on clinicaltrials.gov. And this website also lists information about Journey and has the locations of the clinical sites that are participating. So we already have a few clinical sites that are open and actively recruiting people living with LGMD2A into Journey. And there will be more sites that will be activated over time. So we recommend that you continue to look at clinicaltrials.gov for updates. If you look on that website, you'll see that there are sites that are listed as active and recruiting, and those are the open sites. And then there's also sites that are listed as active and not recruiting. And these are sites that we hope will be activating and opening in the near future. The sites that are listed as completed or closed. Please note also, that there's both US and ex-US sites that are available. And if you see a site that's close to you and you are interested in enrolling, we recommend that you email or call the study coordinator directly following the contact information that's listed on clinicaltrials.gov. Can go to the next slide. So lastly, the website limgirdle.com is a great way to generally stay connected with the LGMD patient affairs team here at Sarepta. The goal and purpose of our patient affairs team is to connect with patients and families who want to learn more about Sarepta, about our natural history studies and our clinical trials. So you can send our team a direct email here to connect, and visit limgirdle.com for general information on the LGMDs and also how to learn more about our work. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and I just want to say thank you so much for participating in this webinar, and for really considering to participate in the LGMD2A part of our Journey Natural History Study. I realize that this is a huge ask of the community, and I hope you understand better now through this webinar the importance of natural history studies and the goals of Journey in particular. I also want to just acknowledge all of the participants and families who've already taken part in clinical trials or natural history studies. We really thank you so much for your devotion to moving the field forward so we can advance therapy development. And I can hand it now, Jen, back over to you, who I believe you're going to lead a live Q&A.
Yep. Thank you so much for that great presentation. I want to remind everybody to use the Q&A box if you have any questions. We already have some coming in, so I will get started with those. So the first question is, what is the status of the LGMD2A-R1 gene therapy program, and when will you begin studies for LGMD2A-R1?
Thank you so much for that question. So as I mentioned during the webinar, our gene therapy program for LGMD2A-R1 is currently in the preclinical phase of development. So, there's still work that we need to do before advancing it into the clinic. For example, we're currently working on testing our gene therapy product in animal studies to evaluate the safety and the efficacy of our product. And we're also building our manufacturing process for this product. I mentioned during the webinar too, it's really important to spend the time to develop that manufacturing process at an early stage in development so we can avoid significant process changes in the future. However, while all of this animal and manufacturing work is ongoing, we're using that time to increase our working knowledge of the natural history and experiences of people living with LGMD2A-R1. And that's really why we're so excited about opening enrollment for 2A into Journey today. We'll definitely keep the community updated as we get closer to clinical trials, and we really appreciate all your support. And in the meantime, we just encourage everyone to get involved in natural history studies like Journey if you're able, or sign up for registries like the C3 registry, get on the mailing list with Sarepta at limgirdle.com, just so you can stay connected and get updates and information as it becomes available.
Great, thank you. And I do want to mention, because you said the C3 registry, anybody can find that at lgmd2a.iamrare.org. So lgmd2a.iamrare.org. The next question actually relates to that first one. So is being in a natural history study such as Journey required if somebody wants to potentially enroll in a gene therapy study when it's available?
So the short answer is no. Being in a natural history study is not required to enroll in a gene therapy study, sponsored by Sarepta. However, as we discussed, during the webinar, natural history studies are often a great way to learn about new clinical trials coming online, and in some cases could support enrollment into a clinical trial. It's really too early right now to know what this would look like for our 2A gene therapy program, but any future clinical trial for LGMD2A could recruit patients from Journey or from other natural history studies like GRASP. So that way, if you're in a natural history study already as a participant, your physician, leading the study at your site may be able to contact you if they believe that you might be eligible to enroll into a clinical trial.
Thank you. So we have actually several questions that are all related. And these are asking about the multiple natural history studies. So as you mentioned, there's more than one that are active right now, including GRASP. Could somebody participate in more than one at the same time if they wanted to? And also somebody asked if you could compare the studies or contrast them.
Sure. So the short answer as to, whether you could enroll in more than one is yes. Technically, since these studies do not involve a treatment, it's a natural history study. You could decide to enroll in more than one natural history study, and we've heard about people, doing this in other diseases. However, your decision really to be in multiple natural history studies is, really a personal one, and we really recommend that you carefully discuss this with your doctor and the study investigators so you can understand, what the commitment is, and make the best choice for you and for your family. Not all natural history studies are the same, and the studies may differ. Some of the ways that studies may differ are in the frequency of visits, the length of the study sites, the specific assessments that are required, the participant population that's being recruited, ambulatory versus non-ambulatory, for example. So these are different ways that the different natural history studies may differ. And these are all important things to consider as you make the decision to enroll.
Great, thank you. Can you speak a little bit about if there's any functional tests that need to be done in order to qualify for Journey?
No, there's no functional test that you have to complete as part of like the inclusion exclusion criteria for Journey. You don't have to get a certain score on a functional test to qualify for Journey, for example. But the functional tests are part of the assessments in Journey. So, after you would make the decision to enroll in Journey, you would do some of these physical function tests. And, the study coordinator would go through all those tests that are part of the study with you if you're interested in participating. And you can, consider all of that before you would choose to enroll.
Thanks. Somebody asks, is a genetic test a prerequisite for joining Journey? And do they should they use their current genetic report when they want to enroll?
So the short answer is yes. A genetic test, confirming that you do have LGMD2A or 1 is a requirement for joining Journey. If you do not have a confirmed genetic diagnosis of LGMD2A, the clinical site would work with you, to get this genetic testing done before, you would enroll into Journey. If you've already had genetic testing, we would still reconfirm that testing as part of the enrollment into Journey. But you could go ahead and get enrolled, during the time that we're reconfirming that genetic test.
Okay, and we have two questions about biopsies. One person asks, they had a biopsy done about 10 years ago, and that several samples were taken and sent to diagnostic labs. Are you able to access those biopsies? And then I'm going to ask you my second question now. Regarding the muscle biopsy, is that something that Sarepta pays for, or is that billed through a patient's insurance?
So on the second question, if a patient were to choose, to undergo the optional muscle biopsy as part of Journey, that's something that would be covered, through the study, not through their insurance. The first question on previous, biopsies done, there may be a way, working with the team to access that that archived biopsy and, provide that tissue instead of undergoing another one. And so, we would, work with the participant and the study investigator to see if that were possible.
Okay. We have a question asking about the confidentiality of the study. So who's able to access the data?
So who's able to access the data? I mean, this is a Sarepta sponsored study. And so, the data stays within Sarepta. However, the goal of the study is to share, our learnings on LGMD in the future. And for example, we have already shared some of that initial data on the sarcoglycanopathies at conferences or other scientific forums. So, that would be, shared in the future. It's not, the way that these natural history studies are shared at those forums, it's not like patient specific data, right, that's shared. It's data that's grouped together so that, there's not a concern about your specific, data being linked to your name, in any sort of presentation like that.
Okay. Somebody asked about genetic test results, and actually two questions about them. One is if they've only had one mutation in Calpain-3 that's been identified, can they participate? And the other question is, does the genetic test need to be in English, or can it be translated to English from another language?
I'll have to circle back on the second question. On the first question, it's hard for me to know exactly what your genetic test report said and what specific, mutation is linked to your disease. So really the best way to handle that is to, work with your with your doctor and the study coordinator to, find out if you can reconfirm your genetic testing, or if you have a variant of unknown significance, whether that could potentially be resolved to allow for your enrollment into the study.
Okay. And then there's some questions popping up about the sites. Will there be more sites that become active in the coming weeks or months? And also, what's the best way to find like a list or a map of the sites that are available?
Sure. So yes, there will be more sites that will be opening in the near future. The best way to find out the sites that are active is through clinicaltrials.gov. And I don't know if it's possible to go back maybe to that slide in the presentation with those links.
Sure.
That way people have the information. But on clinicaltrials.gov, there's a list of sites that are participating in Journey. And there's some sites that are listed as, active and recruiting. Those are the sites that are open right now and recruiting patients with Calpainopathy. By going back and checking the site over time, you will be able to see, as new sites become active and recruiting, and that's really the best way to find out about, updates. So it's the second QR code here.
Okay, and then can you just reiterate, so if it says if a site is active but doesn't say it's recruiting, those are ones that might change with time?
Sorry, can you repeat that again, Jen? Will the site list change over time? Is that the question?
Well, this person was saying that they see the sites closest to them are active but not recruiting, so they wanted to ask about the status of those.
Yes, please check back, because we hope those sites will be recruiting, in the near future. So check back on clinicaltrials.gov.
Okay.
Tamara, please jump in if there's anything that you would like to add as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate the same point, that it will be periodically updated. Sites have been invited to include 2A patients. And so if they're able to be a site, that will change on clinicaltrials.gov to show that they're recruiting.
Thanks. We do have a question asking if the presentation will be shared. So yes, we're sharing a recording of this presentation on C3's website. It will probably take 1 to 2 weeks, but you'll be able to find it there. And with that, I think we can wrap up. So I just want to thank Tamara and Amanda again for joining us and for sharing this exciting news about Journey and the new 2A cohort. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining.
Jen, I just want to step in just to clarify one point that came up in the Q&A, just for our audience. So there was a question about the biopsy being paid for. So we just wanted to clarify that, that this should be discussed with the study site. So it's a very complex answer based on where the potential participant natural history study lives. So just wanted to reiterate that it's not as simple as it will be paid for in full. And so we just wanted to clarify that that should be a conversation with the site coordinator. And it might depend, as I said, based on where the individual is living, what country they're in, what site they've chosen to potentially enroll in. So that will just require a follow-up conversation. So I just wanted to clarify that. But just on the kind of costs related to travel and things like that, also, we have a policy in place to work with families to make it feasible for them to be able to travel to sites and make it manageable with other considerations in their life.
Thank you. And I also want to reiterate, if people have questions specific to their eligibility or questions that might be more specific to their scenarios, to definitely speak with their doctors or with the study coordinators who can help you with those. All right. Well, with that, I will wrap it up. Thank you both for joining us. And thank you, everybody in the audience, for coming to watch today. Take care.
Thank you, Jen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.